Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
And David and I are two superfans from totally different generations that take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
And today we're going to be having an inside look at not only a wonderfully romantic episode of the series, but also what I would call a foundational episode of the series, which we'll get to later. And that is an episode entitled, Oh, How We Met the Night We Danced.
Yeah, so let's talk about the title right out of the gate because Carl often was very clever with his titles, usually taking some other phrase or movie or show of the day. This is my take. I had never seen anything confirm it, but it was a takeoff, I think, on a line from the anniversary song, which had the line, Oh, how we danced on the night we were wed.
Mm.
I think this was his little spin on that.
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm not in the, cultural zeitgeist of that time period, so I'm not sure where they come from. That sounds just as plausible. Yeah, that's cool.
Sometimes this title, when you see it on lines, is Oh, how we met on the night that we danced.
Mm.
And sometimes it's simply Oh, how we met the night that we danced. We did get a copy of the script, and the on is not in there in
Yeah.
Carl's original title. So
Yep.
somehow it got edited in by folks along through the decades. As we said, this episode written by Carl Reiner, written on May 14th, 1961, revised later on July 14th, 1961, filmed July 18th, 1961, and eventually airing on Halloween of that year.
Mm. And we are very early on in the series here. This is actually season 1, episode 5. So we are 5 episodes into the very first season of the show, which I think is very cool.
As you just noted, Abby, and we'll talk about this as we have our discussion today, quite a foundational episode in
Yeah.
terms of the entire series. This episode was directed by a gentleman named Robert Butler, who directed 2 episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show over the course of the series, this one and Buddy's The Unwelcome House Guest. Butler directed other television shows, The Untouchables, Dr. Kildare, The Fugitive, The Twilight Zone. In his later directing life, he also directed pilots for a number of series, including Star Trek, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, and Hill Street Blues.
I have a few synopses of the episode.
Go ahead, you start today.
I will start with this one. While rummaging through Rob's old army equipment, Rob and Laura recall that he broke her foot the night they met.
Rummaging, huh?
I
Mine is a little different, a lot less rummaging. While cleaning out the bedroom closet, Rob finds his old army boots, bringing back memories of how he and Laura first met.
It's cute. Okay, I have one more to share. Rob and Laura recount to Richie about their first meeting after they find Rob's old army coat and boots in their closet. Initially, Rob had made a poor impression on Laura. Nevertheless, he was determined to develop a relationship with her.
It's interesting how these synopses evolve, I think. I did find a article in a paper from that day describing the episode, and here's what they wrote in anticipation of the airing of this episode. Oh, how we met on the night that we danced was how they titled it. It's hard to imagine a good Van Dyke show without Maury Amsterdam and Rose Marie,
Oh.
but this is it.
Mhm.
And the reason is Van Dyke. The multi-talented showman shows off a few facets of his capabilities and a story about how he met his wife, Mary Tyler Moore, while he was an Army sergeant and she was a USO entertainer. His awesome abilities with contrived awkwardness are unrivaled, as you will see in her dance sequence. A great summary.
Oh, very good. Hit all the points. I mean, that's a wonderful write-up of that. That's very cool. Now, growing up, I watched this episode a lot. I think it's especially sweet, especially romantic. In season 1, you get a lot of those more, has a little more romance to it. It's not really Rob and Laura's honeymoon, but it kind of is for us because this is the first time we've seen them together and they really have this early chemistry. Maybe as actors too, they're having kind of this early chemistry. And I think as a whole, the episode really just shaped for me as a kid, like what I would think of as a successful relationship between two people. I still love the way that mementos and like sentimentality often play a role in these characters on the show and their relationships. It's beautiful.
We've noted this was a very early episode, filmed 4th or 5th. And it was interesting because there were a number of other actors, guest stars, if you will, that appeared in this episode. We'll probably talk about them as we go, but we can highlight some of what they did here at the top. The first was Glenn Turnbull, who played the role of Mark Mullen. Mark, in the episode, is Laura's dance partner in the USO number. And Mullen was quoted back in the day saying he was actually referred to as a Lego mania dancer, which was an eccentric type of tap dancing. And there weren't too many of folks like that around. Prior to Van Dyke, he had appeared for many years on the Jack Benny Show. And as an interesting aside, he was also quite a tennis fanatic. And in later years, the head tennis person at a club in the Los Angeles area. And he often played tennis, believe it or not, with Johnny Carson.
Very cool.
You know, who originally supposedly was vying for that role of Rob Petrie against Dick Van Dyke.
Which is so, bonkers to think of, but very cool. And then we also have a character named Marsha Rochelle. She'll be the one with the tennis shoes. She was played by a woman named Nancy Chickee. That's Chickee. Chickee James Culp. And I read a little about her. It sounds like she did a few things. She most notably appeared in the 1963 sexploitation film, The Hollywood Nudes Report. That's kind of her claim to fame, I think. David, have you ever spoken to Chickee?
No, I didn't. And we could have. She only passed away in the recent years. She guest starred on the Van Dyke Show. She also toured with other U.S. actors, Tony Curtis and Piper Laurie, to promote bonds during the Korean War.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Later years, she was in The Flamingo Kid, Falling in Love, and Pritzi's Honor. She also dated Joe DiMaggio and Steve McQueen.
Interesting.
Throughout the years. Yeah.
Wow. Then we come to, I would say, one of my favorite side actors on the show of all time. He's only in 2 episodes. You'd swear he was in more because I think his comedy and timing is just absolutely top notch. It's one of my absolute favorites, and that is Marty Ingalls, who plays Saul. Apparently, I didn't know this, that he was actually based on Carl Reiner's real-life army buddy, Saul Pomeroy. And you'll kind of see this name appear in different iterations throughout the series. I noticed in the script there were a lot of handwritten lines of Marty's in there. I'm not sure if those were improvised or if they were just worked out later and they were added in afterwards. So I always wondered that because it would make sense. He's quite the talent.
Not only was he Rob's army buddy here, but it was just around this time that Marty was cast in the TV sitcom I'm Dickens, He's Fenster with John Astin, which was also shot on that same Desilu Cojuangos studio lot. Through the years, he had sporadic acting work and other voiceover work. Fans probably know that he was also married for many years to Shirley Jones from the Partridge Family, even though what you'll also read is that Shirley was really the breadwinner of the family, I guess.
There's a lovely book that I've read about the two of them together. I think they wrote it, if he wrote it or she wrote it together with him, but it's about their relationship. And it's quite lovely if you want to seek that book out. It's neat. And
our final character is our young lady, Ellen, who was actress Jennifer Gillespie. Jennifer, born in 1954, appeared on Shirley Temple's storybook, the Dick Powell Theater, Hazel, Laramie, Alfred Hitchcock. Had a cute role at the end of this episode, which we'll talk about when we get there. What I found was that it looked like her acting credits stopped about the time that she was 10 years old, so in the mid 60s, and then we never ever saw her again. I wonder if Jennifer is still with us today.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Try to find her and see if she recalls any of this at such a young age.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. As we said, it's a very foundational episode of the show, and it's also the first in a series of flashback episodes. I did a little bit of math. It seems that there's a flashback episode every 4 or 5 episodes, so about a quarter of the series is flashback, which I found interesting. And these are so important because they serve so many functions. So Carl took such great care in writing these flashback episodes with such depth that it really makes the entire show, the world they're in, the characters feel completely real, totally relatable, and just layered and deep. These flashbacks provide sort of the origin story, the backstory to how do these major characters get to where they are right now? Where did they come from? It helps reveal sort of past experiences and things that might have kind of shaped their personalities into the character they are now that we see, and the relationships. And I think it also adds running jokes or character traits, conflicts that sort of like weave throughout the series. You'll see come back again and again and again. And we'll point out some of those as we go. It just really strengthens the emotional connection we have to the characters. and keeps some fun like references that can like, reference back to flashbacks and later on and sort of enhances the continuity. And also it just breaks up the usual sitcom format. You get this fresh new setting because you're not still in the same, three spaces. So it's such a fun thing. Carl is a genius with it.
Using flashbacks and then also using dream sequences
Yes.
at other times
Yes.
to accomplish different things. Well, our show opens in the Petrie bedroom. Laura's cleaning out the bedroom closet. And Rob and Richie are also there sitting. Rob is on the bed and Richie's sort of sitting on a chair on the side of the room. It's also important to note, I think, this is early in the series and there's quite a presence of the Dick Van Dyke Show theme music as background music here. Hagen was the composer and setting the mood, setting the tone. Folks, go back and listen as the scene opens up. You'll hear that familiar theme being played as background music.
That's so interesting. And you'll also see the early, I would call it the early 60s dynamic of a family, where just like Laura doing everything and Rob and Richie just sort of sitting by reading, which is kind of hilarious. But they end up helping in the end.
Yeah, he's sort of sitting on the bed and says, leave the junk in the closet or just dump it all out, until she pulls out his army coat. And he says, well, not my army coat. And Richie says, oh, I want to try it on. I want to try it on, Daddy. I want to see what you look like when you were a soldier. So Rob tries the coat on. And of course, it's way too big.
Which is a great recurring joke that he's been skinny his whole life, with just out reprieve. Like back then, even now, he's just like, Illinois skinny or whatever they call him. So.
And out of the pocket, he pulls this sort of stretchy hat, which he pulls on the top of his head down over his eyes, and puts the silly face and looks at Laura and says, hey, baby, how about a kiss? Which, again, is a little foreshadowing for our future storyline. Can
I just note in the script here, they refer to his bit as, quote, the Dick Van Dyke special. That's what it says.
Yeah.
It says, how about a little kiss, baby? And then it says the Dick Van Dyke special. They're just knowing what he's going to do is his own bit, his own creation, and they're just going to let him run with it.
I think that Dick was allowed to use so many little bits and pieces of things that he had done prior in his career, and Carl leveraged those things. He knew what Dick could do.
And we'll see that more later on in the episode, too, as he performs.
Correct. And that was part of Carl Reiner's genius in letting the characters excel at the things he knew they could do so well and entertain us that way.
Absolutely.
Eventually, Rob says, honey, we can't throw out this coat. There are too many good laughs left in it.
Rob turns to put his coat away, and we see Laura in the foreground discovering a big shoebox sort of under a pile of clothes. And she sees it, and then she hides it away so Rob doesn't see it. But of course, we see Rob can see it over the shoulder that she's hiding something, and he kind of wants to investigate. So he asks her, what's in the shoebox? And there's some banter back and forth. And Laura says, well, it's just Richie's baby shoes. Well, we want to see him. So she pulls him out, the little baby shoes. And we notice the box is a little bit bigger and there might be something else in it.
I like the fact that Richie remarks, oh, they're so soft. And Rob says, well, yes. And he says, no, Freddie had iron shoes. They have to go through explaining that the baby shoes were bronze.
Which is such a cool thing because I don't know if many people do that now. It's such a throwback, kind of a cool old tradition. That's an awfully big box. What's inside of it? He grabs it from her, opens it up, and he says, "Aw, honey, you saved my combat boots." And we get another recurring kind of theme. Richie says, "Why? Why did you save those?" And Rob says, "Because your mommy's sentimental." And you will see that now throughout these series, the letters from Joe Coogan that she hides in the wall, the sugar cube from Jacques Savan, like she's got a sentimental heart where she's holding these mementos that mean something to her. And it's such a real character thing.
And in this case, Rob says to Richie, "Those are the boots I was wearing when I broke your mommy's toes." Interestingly, again, right at this point, we begin to hear in the background the music of You Wonderful You. Again, a precursor to what we'll see in their song and dance number later in the episode.
Oh, cool.
There is a fun exchange between Richie and Rob discussing USA versus USO, but that leads us into the flashback where Rob begins to tell Richie the story of how his mother was in the USO.
As a kid, learning about the USO show like that was great. I had no idea what it was. So sort of introducing other generations to the sort of 60s world or I guess it would have been like 40s world. It helps so much.
We get the ripple effect on our screen, and suddenly we flash back to the dance hall where we see Glenn as Mark Bullen doing some amazing dance steps. He talked about Legomania or whatever. His legs are incredibly long.
They're rubber. Crazy long legs.
And the steps that he does are pretty incredible.
I mean, his span, the way like his leg span, it's like feet. I mean, it's insane. It's crazy. Well, and I wonder if that's why they sort of pegged him for this part, because I think Dick Van Dyke dances not quite as advanced, but very similarly. And I wonder if it was a great fit.
Mark finishes his steps while Rob sort of looks on from the side, and then Rob decides he's going to counter with his own little series of steps and does a pretty neat little number.
We get right away, oh, he's a little performer. He's got some skills.
Yes. And away he goes backstage.
And this is where we meet Saul, who we immediately recognize is buddies with Rob. He's going over some papers or something. He's basically handling the backstage duties. We can tell that this is recreation hall. There's a backstage. There's tasks to be done, and he's responsible for those things. We get right away that they're chummy, and that they also have a history together, because he tries to convince Rob tonight when he's going to MC the show. He wants him to do his drunk bit. He's got this comedy bit that Saul loves, and he really wants him to do it. Oh, please, give me the face. Finally, Rob grabs the fatigue cap, which we saw in the first scene in the bedroom, puts it on, and does his sort of walks drunk, kind of rubber-kneed kind of thing. And, hey, baby, how's about a little kiss? And when he turns around...
Who does he run into but Laura Meeker, who has just entered through the backstage. And at that point, Laura makes quite a face at him and goes on her way.
And we get that she's a dancer. She's got some tights on, grabbing some sheet music there. So we get this setup right away. She leaves disgusted, but Rob leaves absolutely smitten. Just instant love at first sight for him.
Who is that girl, he asks. And Sal says, oh, not that girl. She's stuck up.
And can I add here quickly that these earlier episodes, I don't know if it was because of the budget or just that maybe the network didn't have as much confidence in the show yet because it was so early on, but there's a ton of dialogue. They're so dialogue driven because they only take place in like one or two spaces. So almost this whole episode takes place in this backstage rec hall area. And so in order to like sort of fill it out, it's just dialogue. And it's wonderful. And so, yeah, we're getting that right here, is that everything is going to happen in this one space and people are going to come in and out of it. But that's where it's at.
Saul continues with Rob, I asked her out, and do you know what she said? No, thank you. She's in the USO. Isn't she supposed to entertain the troops? He says, ain't I a troop?
And I love his monologue. I said, how do you do, sweetie? How about you and I take a top down to the PX? I'll spring for a couple of beers. And then if I'm not too drunk, I'll ice a weapons carrier and take a spin around the obstacle course. Nice. Like, that's right. And we really get this setup that Saul's this really like sort of rough around the edges, kind of, salt of the earth simpleton kind of guy. Sets us up for Saul and the sponsor later and things like that. But it's a fun dynamic because you got Rob, the sort of intellect, pallet around with this guy who they're best friends, but he's very clearly different way of looking at the world.
Through their discussion, all of a sudden we intercut to sort of a look at Glenn and Laura dancing on the stage. And it's the first glimpse that we get of Mary Tyler Moore's dancing. And you can see, oh, she can dance too. Not only is Mark Mullen or Glenn Turnbull dancing, but Mary's doing quite a few steps
Definitely.
too. With that, Mary comes from off stage and Sal tries to ask her again.
So he's jumping in to help Rob,
He says to Rob, any girl that doesn't want to go for a ride in a weapons carrier and doesn't like beer, you're wasting your time.
Well, and you also see that beer in Saul and the sponsor. Remember, he gives him the beer opener. Like, this is his thing. I also made a note that he refers to him as Rob Petrie, which I didn't know if that was just like a fun thing or if that's just how they were saying it. I didn't know what that was. Or maybe Marty said it wrong and nobody corrected him, but it kind of adds something to it.
At this point, Sal removes the cap from Rob's head. And it's interesting because when he pulls it off, the hair gets all messed up. Laura has exited at this point. When Laura returns moments later, Rob's hair is all back in place.
I didn't notice
recombed.
That. Cool.
So, fans, take a look at that.
That's fun.
The hat comes off. It's a mess. Laura goes away. Sal enters. Cool. Laura comes back, and there's Dick's hair all perfectly back. Awesome. And it was clearly from another take of the scene.
Saul leaves and he goes to mop or something. And Rob's alone in this backstage area. And it's like he's ready to make his move. He's seen her a couple times now. He tells Saul, like, I got to meet that girl. And so now he's sort of lingering by the dressing room door, kind of thinking up a scheme, like, how's he going to get her to talk to him? Because clearly she's no interest at this point. So he's kind of by the dressing room door. And instead of Laura, who comes out, it's another dancer who is Chicky, who we talked about earlier, playing Marsha Rochelle, that she steps out. And I always wondered, is Rochelle a nod to New Rochelle, kind of? I just wondered,
Has to be.
Rob notices that he kind of watching her cooking up his scheme, and he sees that she's got a bag with a pair of sneakers hanging out of it. And we don't quite know what he's going to do, but she walks off stage, and then Rob does his great, like, where he exits too, And then there's a few beats, and then he comes back in whistling like do 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 like that, and he's got the sneakers in his hand. He's kind of spinning them around, so we know he's stolen them from her.
We're still trying to figure out what's going to
Yeah.
happen with that, but he decides that he will pretend that they were Laura's sneakers. So he knocks on the dressing room door. Laura opens up, introduces himself, and he says, I have your sneakers. No, they're not my sneakers. I have them.
Yeah.
She ends up introducing herself as Laura Meeker.
Which a nod to Richard Meeker, her first husband, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Basically, she tells him she wants nothing to do with a sneaker sneak thief.
And he's so overconfident here. It's hilarious. You know, like she's literally gave him like zero green lights this entire time. And he's just like going for it. Like it's so charming in this awkward way. he's just really going for it. So overconfident.
And he says, to meet you, I would have stolen Marcia. So give me one good reason why you won't go out with me.
Well, the first reason, which she says, is we're not allowed to date servicemen. And then there's this monologue that Rob goes on. So he uses that first point as a way to introduce himself. Oh, well, didn't I tell you I'm not a serviceman? I'm a spy, And then he goes on this, it's almost a full page of script where he's mentioning like he had a background in dramatics and journalism and English. And so, he's kind of introducing himself as intellectual kind of guy. He attended the University of Illinois. We know where he's from now. And he claims to have no bad habits and never complains. He's sort of just setting up this sort of personal ad for her of like, let me sell you myself for the next 5 minutes. And then my favorite bit at the end, which is, and as for our wedding, you can invite anyone you want as long as I reserve the right to have either my father or my mother. But it's just so dialogue driven. It's wonderful.
To which then he ends and he says, so what's the second reason? And she simply says, I don't like you.
At all.
Sal immediately chimes in with, again, a line that we'll hear over and over, is that he makes a rotten first impression. If we could only, how does he say it?
If we would only meet people the second time first or something like that.
Even he sort of cocks his head when he says that. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, and let me just add in here that we are getting the Rob and Laura dynamic immediately right off the bat. We have a couple things that are key, which is they have out of this world chemistry. No matter how they're mad at each other, liking each other, their chemistry is all over the place. It's amazing. We also get the two dynamics, which is that Rob is charming, often clumsy, and gets carried away kind of a little too easily. And Laura is smart, independent, sometimes exasperated with him, and sort of grounds Rob when he's kind of overdoing it a little bit. And I think you get here too that their relationship is built on humor, lighthearted banter, affection, but it's always rooted in sort of like a deep admiration, a deep love and respect. And I think Carl's just it's absolute beautiful character development.
Saul goes on, Sarge, she's a cold potato. To which Rob says, you add a little mayonnaise, some celery, spices, and an egg, and it becomes a delicious potato salad. I love how he says potato salad. At which point Saul says, boy, I could sure go for a hoppity sandwich now. Some clever writing.
Yeah, I love these sort of like hints to Jewish culture and New York, and like, oh, it's so fun. You get so much in so few lines. So Marcia returns to find her sneakers, and Saul introduces Rob and himself to her. Here's Rob, here's my buddy. I'm his best buddy, Saul Pomeroy. And they kind of have this exchange. And she asks him, well, what are you doing here? And we get, again, more origin story. Well, Saul says he's a sergeant, and well, I'm nothing yet. And she says, well, great. Well, do you work here? And yeah, we work at the rec hall. And we get Saul starts saying he's a curtain puller. He's a stage manager. He sews all these things. And he's about to introduce Rob as, I guess, just the song and dance man or the MC. And Rob kind of jumps in with his own scheme.
Which is, I'm a reporter for the Camp Crowder Gazette. And as we've already pointed out, several tips of the hat along the way. Marcia, Rochelle. Well, we have another one here in Camp Crowder. Carl Reiner used Camp Crowder in the script because that's where he was stationed at one point when he was in the military.
Right, what you know, I guess, right?
Rob sort of tries to convey to Saul, I'm the reporter. We need the camp photographer. Go get the camp photographer.
And Saul's the best when he's slow at catching on, Court. Oh, wait, wait, I got you, photographer, okay.
He almost has to whack him on the head. Saul realizes what's going on and exits so Rob can have a little private time with Marcia.
So here we have this lovely little interview with Marcia, which is just, it's so hilarious. There's so many little bits in it. First, we get that she's a little ditzy, which makes it even cuter. He says, oh, where do all you girls come from? She says, oh, we're from all over. So-and-so's from Brooklyn. I'm from the Bronx. Laura's from Brooklyn. He says, oh, you're really spread out there, huh? We get that he's like maybe a little too smart for some of these types that he's hanging out with. He's going to see all walks of life there. And I think Mary Tyler Moore is actually from Brooklyn. Is that right?
She is.
Yeah, which I thought was kind of cool.
So he begins to interview her and starts to ask about the other girls. And Rob says, well, let's get the other girls out of the way so I can concentrate on you.
And her line, "You're cute."
You're cute. Yes. So she proceeds to tell Rob that Laura collects recipes. She's always cutting them out of the newspaper and remarks then, she's sort of as an aside, I never found out what happened to Little Abner because apparently the Little Abner cartoon was on the back of the recipe that she cut out. So she never got to find out what happened.
Well, and the best line from Rob, he's taking notes and she goes, "Yeah, I never found out if so and so got somebody in the pigsty or the swine in the pigsty or something." It's some joke. Originally in the script, it had a swamp instead of a pigsty, which I thought was strange, which I don't know why they changed these things, but I thought that was interesting.
So Rob says, well, what songs does she like? And Marcia says, well, why don't you ask her yourself?
I'd rather be talking to you.
To which again, she responds, you're cute. You're cute.
Then she starts to catch on, though. So he says, "So, well, let me get the other girls out of the way. This girl, Laura, what kind of guy do you think she would go for?" And she goes, "Oh, okay, I see what you're doing. You're interested in her. I think you got some nerve," kind of thing. And she walks away. And we hear Saul's entering as this is happening. And he starts to do his bit again, where he's like, "Oh, well, let me tell you, he makes a rotten first impression," like kind of trying to save it for him. Girls love him. And I think he's eating a sandwich too this time, which just makes it even funnier.
Rob explains to Sal that little Miss Stuckup apparently likes to collect recipes, and he begins again to conjure up some plot, how we can use that information to try to figure out a strategy, kind of get in with her a little bit more. What he doesn't realize is that while he's explaining this to Sal, Laura opens her dressing room door and sort of approaches him from behind, and Sal's trying to clue him in, like, there she is, Cyrus, there she is, right?
Keeps signaling, like, just right behind you.
And I love Laura's line, which is, your problem is that you suffer from an inflated ego.
Mm-hmm. You think you're irresistible, don't you?
And proceeds to tell him off and storms out. Again, Sal screams, it's only the first impression. But despite all of this, Rob's enthusiasm is not crushed.
If anything, it's increased because he's smiling the entire time she's yelling at him. He's just happy she's just talking to him, essentially. And then after all this, she leaves. It's even more intensified because he says kind of the thing we've been waiting to hear the whole episode, which is Rob says, "Saul, that is the girl I'm going to marry." Rob's got his mind made up. And we know it's going to happen because we're in a flashback. We know they're going to get married.
Sal is sort of confused by the whole thing and then says, well, you know what? That'll give you a chance to get to know you better.
His timing just really anchors all the scenes.
The interplay between Dick and Marty Ingalls is really, really well done.
So maybe there's a commercial break here. You're getting the sense. So They were back in the bedroom in present time. I'm guessing to reorient the audience in case they're just tuning in that, hey, this is a flashback episode and this is how we got to it. They're continuing to tell the story. And Richie says, but tell me, when does Dad break Mom's toes? A moment they've alluded to as it's gone on, but we haven't seen it yet. So we know it's coming. And so Rob transitions back into the flashback for us. Okay, well, after she was done, I went up to Mama's dancing partner. We kind of go back to the USO shows backstage.
Our flashback continues with Mark and Laura on the stage finalizing the end of their dance routine. And Laura exits and Rob sort of sneaks out from behind the curtain and asks Mark what he should say that night about the show and their number. And Mark says, it's a dance number by Mark Mullen and Laura Meeker, You Wonderful You.
Which is a song we're going to see again and again and again be a foundational element of their relationship, something that has just linked them for life. It's a lovely song.
So Rob asks Mark if Mark can teach him a few of the dance steps. And Mark says, well, why not? We stole it from Gene Kelly. It is important, again, to note, You Wonderful You was actually a song done by Gene Kelly and Judy Garland in the 1950 MGM musical Summer Stock. And it truly is almost a copy of what they did in terms of the vocal pieces.
Is it? Oh, I have to check that out.
The one person starting and the other person echoing with their little thing. Truly, it is a takeoff on that. So when they said they stole it from Gene Kelly, they're telling the truth.
Funny.
Mark does proceed to teach Rob the dance steps and is impressed that Rob really knows so much of the routine. Apparently, he's been watching from backstage and figuring it out along the way.
Now, do you think they started this so early on in the season showing his sort of song and dance man bits because people were already familiar with him with Bye Bye Birdie and things like that? Was it sort of acquaint people with him and what they might know him in so far? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I mean, that's because, Bye Bye Birdie was a stage show.
Sure.
And Dick Van Dyke was not really that well known. He had been in the business for years, but in very limited markets.
And only certain people were going to see that stage show.
But I think Carl knew the gem that he had in Dick's ability to do pantomime and to do dance and to do song, and wrote to those characters to leverage the best of their abilities so that they would excel.
Definitely. The next half to 3/4 of the episode are just pure show business. We're going to have a dance number, a comedy routine. It's just be so much of the entertainment part of the show and why we love it so much. And we're going to get to see where Carl really uses Dick's talents to the maximum.
The story advances as a flashback to later in that evening with Rob standing in front of the troops, warming up the audience, doing sort of like a stand-up monologue like a comedian would do.
And I love Saul's laughing off stage the entire time. We get that he's such a good buddy. You know, he's just genuinely loves this act.
It is noteworthy for fans of the show. If you look at the back of the heads, you'll see Frank Adamo is there as a GI, making his second appearance on the show as a member of the audience. And it's at this point that, as we said, Rob is doing his entertainment impressions.
And I will say they're very vaudevillian. Dick Van Dyke and Carl were both born in the 1920s, so after vaudeville's peak, but they're still really heavily influenced by it. We had Carl on the Sid Caesar show of shows. That was very vaudeville-esque. And all their vaudeville stars transitioned to radio and TV, so they still would have been, you know, heavily influencing comedy and shaping comedy. So I think the next few bits that he does are really, they showcase the hallmarks of vaudeville. So we have like the physical comedy that Dick's so great at, the kind of exaggerated character work kind of thing, but then also what you were talking about earlier, which is the pantomime. And I have a DVD. You can get it on Amazon for like $10. I recommend it. It's called Dick Van Dyke in Rare Form. And it's just a vintage collection of Dick Van Dyke in his early career from like 58 to 59 doing comedy performances, most of which are incredibly talented pantomimes. I've never seen pantomime that done that well. And so here he gets to do a little bit with his bits, you know, that he's doing that. So it's just wonderful.
As a tribute to Dick's abilities, if you review Carl's script here, what you have is Carl's notes that say Dick Van Dyke Entertainment Impressions, and he literally lists what they are: lost plane, half man, half woman, bad pickpocket, fighter doing his row work. And interestingly, then there was yet another impression, which was written in as a bashful lighthouse. Now, we have no idea what that bit is.
It almost sounds like the lost plane a little bit.
Maybe we can get to Dick and see if he can remember what the bashful. I'm assuming that these are things that Dick probably performed at some point.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Carl said, "Dick, what can we do?" And
do your bits. You know,
I do think it's funny when he's talking about the bad pickpocket. Is
that's such a good
he
one.
Stumbles over the line, the bad pickpocket.
But they keep it in. They keep it in. It's awesome.
It was just so natural, like that's what would have happened.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and you get kind of this behind the scenes feel because it's not like a real heavily staged performance where we're not seeing like the sort of mechanics of it. No, he's talking to the crowd like, oh, what do you want to hear? You want to hear that one? Okay. And he's kind of just improvising, it seems like. Just kind of a fun, casual way that entertainment is in his life. It's very cool.
Finally finishes his routine, much to the chagrin of the troops who keep wanting more and more. But he said they have a lot on the show that night. So Rob introduces the musical act, which is
so funny.
Larry Spud and his Idaho Potatoes playing the French Fry Blues.
Do we know anything about this ensemble? I wish I did.
Well, the script says that it's a quartet, and in actuality, on the show, it was a trio, which was a guitar player, a clarinetist, and a guy playing the string bass. I will say that in my archives, I have the music, the French Fry Blues, that Hagen actually wrote a piece of music for this.
Wow.
And
that is so cool.
It is fun. And at that point, we hear the music playing on stage. Sounds like it's an electric guitar, although what they had was an acoustic guitar. So I don't know, maybe just sounding a little different. But with that, Rob exits to backstage and passes the other two dancers who are apparently waiting to go on. We've already met Marcia, but I want to pause here and make a note and pay a tribute to the other dancer who's there.
I meant to mention her at the top, but I wondered if we were going to mention her now. Yeah.
Do you know who it is?
Patricia Tibble? Isn't that her name?
Tribble. Pat Tribble.
Yeah. Sorry.
Pat gets no credit in any of the Dick Van Dyke shows that she appeared in, but she appeared first in this episode. She later was in the Twizzle as one of the dancers at the bowling alley.
I did not know this.
And Pat was also, if we harken back to our Christmas podcast, where we talked about the Santa reindeer or whatever.
The sleigh girls, as I was calling it, sleigh bell girls.
Pat was one of the sleigh bell
Oh,
girls
okay.
who helped turn around Alan Brady's
And she's
sleigh.
not credited for any of these.
She is not.
What a shame.
I was only through digging in research that I
Mm.
found who she was. I did contact Sylvia Lewis, who of course we all know,
Mm.
and said, Sylvia, is this Pat Tribble? And she said, that is. We called her
Oh.
Patty. She said she wasn't really in our circle group of dancers, but we knew her, and Patty was quite a talented dancer.
Thank you, Sylvia, for making that note. That's cool.
Pat did other things. She was in West Side Story. She actually was in
Really
the Bye Bye Birdie film. Funny girl.
interesting.
And in 23 episodes of the Carol Burnett Show, appearing as part of the
Wow.
Ernie Flatt dancers.
Hopefully credited at this point.
Sadly, Pat passed away at a very early age from cancer, about the same time that Maury Amsterdam passed away. And I know that because I found Pat's obituary, and on the same page, there's a story of Maury's passing. I also was able to get in touch with Pat Tribble's son, who shared with me that his mom had very fond memories of working with Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore, and that she remarked at what great dancers they were. And that was not always the case, apparently, with celebrities that she danced with. I wanted to make sure that we gave a little tip of the hat to Pat.
Thanks for being part of the Dick Van Dyke Show crew.
I'm glad that we identified who it was. There are a number of those folks that appear in the background as character actors or guests at party that we don't know who they are. It would be interesting to find out if we could learn more about who those
Yeah.
actors were.
Well, so Rob's at this point still on about Laura, which they're referring to her as Dollface, which I think is hilarious. Saul says, "You got her on the brain, huh?" And he goes, "Yeah, I can't get over." And he says, "Well, oh, that reminds me, I got to go tell her she's on in 5 minutes." So Saul tries to go to the door, and Rob says, "His third scheme now." He goes, "Wait, let me do it." He's going to get a chance to talk to her again. So he knocks, and he does this again. He's got some clever schemes.
Yeah.
His scheme is to mumble, "I don't know," kind of that, and she has to open the door. Then forced to open the door and say, "What are you saying?" "Oh, you're on in 5 minutes." So he just gets one glimpse of her, and even though she's totally irritated with them, he's still so happy that they saw her. Of course, she's in a towel too, so I'm sure it was sort of like, oh, seeing her getting changed was also kind of neat for him. Again, him and Saul have this banter. This is the girl I'm gonna marry. He's even more serious now. Seems like it. And I love Saul's line. You're going to get her to say I do? You can't even get her to say hello. And he says, well, she hasn't noticed me so far. And Saul goes, oh, she's noticed you. She just don't like what she's noticed, which is so great. I feel like Saul's often the voice of reason, which is common in literature and things like that, where there's sort of like a simpleton, but they're the ones that always are spot on about what's happening. You know what I mean? So even though he's the one that's not educated, he's like, I know exactly what's happening here. She doesn't like you. It's just always the voice of reason.
So Rob says, Sal, do you have any money? He goes, what, have any money, huh?
What are you gonna do? Buy her?
Yeah. So in effect, Rob decides that he's going to pay Mark to let him do the dance with Laura.
Again, clever.
Mark says, well, huh? And he says, I want you to let me dance with her. I'm not going to throw the number, but I've got to talk to that girl. And Mark grabs the money and says, Joplin, here I come. And away he goes. That's the last that we see of him.
Do you think that this was like Rob knew the dance already and he just uses it later? Or was this his thing all along where I'm trying to figure out if he learned the dance to lure her or if he was going to learn it anyway and just so happened to come in handy later. I'm never sure.
I think we're left to decide on our own, which is also kind of fun, right?
Uh-huh.
Larry Spud and his group finished the number on stage, and Rob announces that Mark just fell down and sprained his ankle and cannot perform, just as Laura has come out of her dressing room and is waiting backstage. And she clearly is very upset at this and says, Mark, where are you? And Rob announces that he will do the dance number. And I love this line. This is the first time that a soft shoe number will be done in combat boots.
Now, can I just take a pause and say that there's a few outfits in this show that as a kid and now that I still have been coveting for several decades. And one of them is this sort of chiffon dress that Laura's wearing in this scene. There's another one where she wears like kind of a frilly nightgown with these sleeves that's also what I love. But this is this beautiful dress. way that it flows, it's so feminine, it's so light, it's got the one shoulder. It's such a perfect dress for this episode and the scene that's going to come up because it's so romantic and so elegant and just has a real femininity to it, which we can tell, which is like what Rob attracted to.
I think we should pause too right here to say most of the musical numbers on the Dick Van Dyke Show were pre-recorded. They would go to Glen Sound. Folks are probably familiar to seeing their names at the end of the credits. And they would record the orchestra, and then they would go in and they would do the vocals. Now, Rosemarie and Maury often did live performances of their things. Many times there was a piano player on set, start off each day with a joke as an example of something they did live and other things. Sometimes they were pre-recorded, but for the most part, Maury and Rosie always were doing live stuff where it was possible.
Do you think that's because of their vaudeville kind of background and that's just how they were used to performing?
I think so. Now, in this case, Dick and Mary's were almost exclusively done by recording. From my archives, what I'd like to share with all of you is one of those little beginnings or outtakes of hearing what happened in the recording studio.
Van Dyke, number 6. You, wonderful you, MV1, take 2.
Oh, David, what a treat.
That little snippet just gives you a little bit of idea, maybe like what happened in the recording session.
So cool.
The recording goes on, and initially, the first part of it is just the background music because that's the point at which Rob and Laura were talking over the music at the beginning of the dance number.
And honestly, we don't even know that they're going to sing. I mean, theoretically, he's only practiced the dance routine at this point. We've not seen her singing or Mark singing or anybody. So it's quite a surprise sometimes. You're like, oh, they're going to sing too. Like it's wonderful.
This represents Dick and Mary's first performance together on the show and Mary's first demonstration of her ability to be able to dance. And if you listen carefully, you can hear their audio banter. When the song starts, you can actually hear a change in the audio quality of their voices because that's where we picked up what was done in the recording studio.
Very cool. Can I make a note here on the sort of overall, what I would call the courting that's going on in this episode, and that's sort of indicative of the 60s. There's kind of the old school romantic trope that's sort of the man getting the woman's to love him by sort of this persistence or trickery kind of manipulation rather than sort of a mutual connection. And I've seen this in other shows at the time, and it can come off a bit manipulative in this day and age, but she isn't giving full agency kind of to dance with him. But let me tell you why I think it works here. And I think why it always works in this show. And it's because of the writing, and it's because of Dick Van Dyke's acting ability. Because Rob, whatever situation he's in, he is never framed or written as sort of the scheming wolf suitor kind of thing, but more as just this endearing, awkward everyman who's just trying his best and usually failing miserably. So I think when it's framed that way, it doesn't come off quite so wolfy. It comes off just like, oh man, this poor guy, And so it's definitely, he leans into that awkward and endearing vibe all the time. And I think that's what saves some of these things.
Yeah, you almost feel bad for him in a way. At this point, Rob comes off the stage. The music has started. And Rob says to her, the show must go on. And Laura says, you set one foot on that stage and I'll have you court-martialed. Then away she goes out onto the stage.
One of the best lines.
So she begins to dance alone. And all of a sudden, from the side, in comes Rob and appears on the stage. And here's where some of the dialogue takes place. Rob saying, why do you hate me?
Doesn't everyone?
What can I do to make you like me?
Get off the stage.
So Rob exits. And after a few moments, back he comes, like he just can't take the hint. He's going to do it no matter what.
Yeah, so persistent. Well, then he comes back in and says, well, now that you like me, will you marry me? Again, we have the 60s, like what they met like, an hour ago. And he's like, I'm going to marry you. I just love it. It's so romantic.
Yeah, wait till the dance is finished, right? And she has this look on her face. They perform the number.
Oh, which is just romantic as heck. It's like she's slowly getting to like him throughout the entire song. I don't know quite when it switches for her, or if it does switch, maybe it switches later when she's at the hospital. But it seems like during the song, there is a switch in her at some point where she's less hesitant about him.
Definitely. You see a softening because at first she's sort of like giving him a look and she's
gritting
sort of
her teeth.
Right. All of a sudden, he sort of puts his arm on her and you sort of just see a little bit of melting taking place.
So here they are singing, dancing, comedy, but also romance, all in the same scene. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. The song is just romantic as heck. It almost looks like an old classic musical to me. The way that they're dancing, they're putting their faces together, she's on his knee, and it's just beautiful.
And absolutely reminiscent, as we said, of this MGM musical with Kelly and Judy Garland.
Yes, absolutely.
We get toward the end and they do a little spin and a little this and a little that, and boom, Rob steps right on her toes. Of course, the astute viewer realizes if you watch it over and over again, as he misses her toes, he's very close, but he does miss.
It doesn't look like he steps on it.
And at the time, who would have thought that we would have reruns and freeze frame and everything where we could stop it?
Yes.
She reacts beautifully and acts as though she does. And with that, again, we flash back and transition back to the bedroom where Rob has been telling the story to Richie.
Rob says he knew that Laura was wonderful the second he laid eyes on her. And they also tell Richie that Laura did not like him, but that when she was in the hospital, he would visit every day, bring her flowers and candy and cookbooks because, her recipes. And it took her about 3 weeks for him to sort of turn. And she realized what a great guy he was. Why I think the sort of courting works here is because she has the kind of dynamic of she's calling it a little bit here. He's going to go after her. She's going to tell you when she's okay with your presence, you're going to have to win her over. And then when she does, she'll let you know when. But I think that's what helps it be less icky, the whole thing.
As they're telling this story, you can almost see the things spinning in Richie's head a little bit as he takes it all in. And he responds to Rob and says, "You should have stepped on both feet, Daddy." And Rob sort of looks at him, "Huh? Then I would have had a twin brother." They laugh and we fade out to commercial before our final scene.
I will say, as a really young kid watching this, I often would make associations that made no sense, but you're like 4 or 5 years old. I often thought that dancing and feet had something to do with like babies being born. Somewhere along the line, when you get with somebody, there's got to be a point at which like there's toes being broke. Like I just always associated with that. I think Richie really did it there with his sort of like little nod to the twin brother. Maybe as a 5-year-old, I was like, "Huh, is that true?" I don't know.
So we fade into our final scene, which still in the bedroom. Robin and Laura are finishing cleaning out the closet when they hear a young girl screech from the other room. And at that point, Ellen and Richie come running into the bedroom.
And here we see Ellen. Do we know here that Ellen is Ellen Helper?
I don't believe that we know that.
Okay.
Ellen, his friend Ellen, is there. To which Ellen says, "Richie stepped on my foot on purpose." And they sort of look at him like, "Richie, did you do that?" And he says, "Yes." He says, "Because I love her and I want her to marry me." And Ellen says,
she says, "I won't marry you because I don't like you."
And here comes back the line that we've heard many times before. "That's because I make a bad first impression."
Of course, they all devolve into laughter.
You can really see Jennifer and Larry giggling as the scene finishes and we fade out to the credits.
A wonderful, wonderful episode. That unique flashback structure, it just jumps off the page. You get such a rich depth of the characters, their backstories, adding all these layers to this show. Then we get the whole romantic tone set for their dynamic and their relationship, which is really, again, the foundation of the series, basically. You get all this great character development. You get all this meat for the series to come to play with. Recurring characters, all the gags, performances. I think if you tuned into the show for the first time in 1961 and you saw this episode, I think you would definitely tune in again. Like you'd be hooked on the show. Just the mix of the comedy and the dance and the song, Dick's performance and Mary, just all of it, the writing, I think you would tune in again. I think it's beautiful.
I think it's one of my favorite episodes, not only in terms of the story, but also in terms of the musical numbers and the performances. And I think you're right. This introduction really lays the foundation for so much more of what is to come in future episodes.
Carl almost had to know where things were going. It's so rich and deep. I wonder, like, did he have sort of the character's trajectory in his head, kind of where they're going to go and what things they're going to do? You almost had to have some idea to sort of link all these things from flashbacks to present in the way that he did.
There is a document of Carl's, which is at the National Comedy Center now in his archives, where there is a written document which describes the various characters.
Really? Oh, I would love to see that.
Yes. So if folks ever get to the National Comedy Center, by all means, look for that or ask someone there about it. It's very interesting to read how he envisioned each of those characters, descriptions of what they were like and all that sort of thing. So we hope you've enjoyed our look back today at Oh, How We've Met, the Night That We Danced.
And make sure you subscribe to our channel if you want to get notified when new episodes are available. You can find us here on YouTube, but we can also be found on all the major streaming platforms.
And a reminder that we are a community, so we value your comments, your questions, and your contributions to the discussion surrounding the show. So feel free to leave us some feedback on our YouTube channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com with a subject of box 7030. And we're gaining viewership as we go here with various podcasts. So we invite you to invite another fan of the show to join us.
The more the merrier.
Absolutely. So for today, I am David.
And I'm Abby, and thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.